There's this image that you refer to very frequently in the book, and you devote this a brief but really good chapter to it in the first part. The image that Washington frequently referred to as living under your own vine and fig tree. Is that right? Vine and fig?
Yes.
Yes. Living under your own vine and fig tree. And it was this vision that he had for what freedom in America would look like. Can you explain that image that he referred to, the background for it, and what it means practically in life?
Well, I love it. Washington obviously loved it. He quoted it 49 times in his writing, the most famous being to the Jews in Newport, Rhode Island, where he hoped that they would live freely under their own vine and fig tree. I love it because Washington is not thought of as the great thinker.
Yeah.
Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, but not Washington. But he loved that. And of course, it comes from the scripture. Now, in scripture, if we look at it in the prophets and in Chronicles, it is partly messianic. In other words, people will have a local peace and freedom, living contentedly under their own vine and fig tree when the Messiah comes. But there's also that great reference that at the time of Solomon, there was such peace and such prosperity that it said that everyone lived under their own vine and fig tree. In other words, it's a vision of local peace, contentment, and freedom. Now, that's important today. You think of the French front porch republic, people who follow Wendell Berry and so on. They're trying to recapture the local, not only over against the national, but over against the global. Because whatever's the most powerful unit of your thinking used to be the nation as opposed to the local neighborhood. That tends to dominate. So the old town hall meeting was swallowed up by the Congress. You know, the original meaning of federal comes from the Latin for covenant, fides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It meant a covenantal agreement between the local and the national, the states and the government, and so on. But it came to mean the feds are the people coming from Washington. And now the whole swing is the nation is under threat from the globalists, George Soros in his style. And I think the idea of Washington's living under your own vine and fig tree, the Catholics call it subsidiarity. In other words, never going higher and more centralized than you need to. So you keep alive personal local freedom. Washington's idea is incredibly interesting and worth exploring today. And once again, Christians should be interested in that, not because we're followers of Wendell Berry or the Front Porch Republic, but because the idea is actually biblical.
In what ways?
Well, in the sense that it's there in the Messianic vision, and it's there. That idea of freedom must start with the individual and the family. The whole of biblical faith is a family-oriented faith. Now, the family isn't a nuclear couple. It's a miniature clan. But the family is the heart of faith in Israel. And you can see how important that was when they were smashed by the Romans in AD 70 and 133. It was the synagogue rather than the temple and the family that was the heart that kept the survival of Judaism alive despite intense persecution and intense scattering all over the world. So those notions are incredibly important, and we've got to understand a biblical view of the family. So, for example, Aaron, if any project, I may have said this to you in a previous time, if any project takes more than a single generation, you need families, you need schools, and you need history. Now, faith obviously needs to go on. And without families and schools and history, it'll founder. Generation Z is appallingly illiterate in terms of the faith. Family breakdown, the crisis of education in churches and others, we've got a generation who doesn't know the gospel. And the same is true of American freedom. Obviously, our primary concern is the gospel, not freedom. It's faith rather than freedom. But both of them require families and schools and history if they're is to be a transmission, a handing on from generation to generation.
Wow. And whenever you say that, I think what are three of the main areas that the left and, as you put before, wokeism has moved and made its influence in our culture. And certainly it'll be in the family and destroying the Christian understanding of the family. It'll be in education by inserting Marxist ideas into public education at every grade level, and certainly in universities for a while, and in making people either historically ignorant or just trying to rewrite history with things such as the 1619 Project. Or, I remember whenever I was 16 years old and going through driver's ed, the guy, and I can't remember the context, but the guy asked the question, when was America founded? And I thought, well, that's an easy question, but no one in the room knew.
Oh,
I was in a room of maybe 40 other, teenagers, young adults. No one knew.
wow.
Yeah, no one knew. I saw a video today of a guy who was on I don't know, he was on some university campus, and he was asking people about who was Joseph Stalin and who was Mao, and none of them knew. But they can name all three of the Kardashians.
Oh, well, there you go. And that's disastrous, absolutely disastrous. Now, as followers of Jesus, we should have been forewarned. I often point out that the sexual revolution, which is taken as very different from the political revolution, actually goes back to the same place in Paris, the Palais Royal, as the political revolution. And if you read the architects, for example, in the 1920s, one of the great ones was Wilhelm Reich, a little book called The Sexual Revolution. He gave us the term. He's quite open. They want to subvert thousands of years of civilization, above all the Jewish and Christian. But then he says we've got two enemies we have to overcome. One, the family, the patriarchal family, and two, the church. So the sexual revolution, which is a kind of form of sex Marxism at its most radical, is out to subvert the family and the church. And they're quite clear about it. That's why they suggest sex education, and they push for it 3 and 4, because you're sidelining parents. Now, they wrote these things 100 years ago. Why weren't we forewarned and standing against it for the family in general, and against some of the wickedness and perversion of sex education at that sort of age, when they're essentially grooming and so on? Well, we should have been forewarned.